a prominent point of conversation is typically, can you connect me to your diverse students? But this is not only a question or point of conversation here at Rutgers University, Newark. This is something that I've experienced during my entire tenure at Rutgers University, period. So I've worked on the New Brunswick campus. This is actually my second campus, my fourth office within the career development space in some capacity. And that has been a recurring theme for the 16 years I've been at Rutgers, which is how to connect with diverse populations. And for different organizations, that means different things. So I'm excited to be here this evening, and I can't wait to engage our panelists and have a truly robust discussion on really what do people mean when we're having this diversity, inclusion, equity, and now social justice conversation. Thank you. So with that being said, that's my brief introduction. What I want to do is take this moment to introduce our panelists. As I mentioned before, I usually like these conversations to be just that. While I am the moderator and I'm going to be asking the questions, I typically find that they are far more interesting when we allow a natural conversation, an authentic conversation to emerge based on the topics that are presented. And we have the panelists' bios, but I always feel it's much more pleasurable to get a sense of who they are from their perspective. So what I want to do is just take some time, and I'll call each panelist by name, and I'm going to use first name in alphabetical order so you can prepare. You have a few minutes, and I'll just ask you to give us a quick overview of who you are, maybe some detail about your background and currently your connection to issues around DEI. So with that being said, I'm going to start with Aisha.
I figured that. I didn't think we would go sort of in reverse order. So hi, everyone. I am Aisha Thomas Petit. I am currently the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for AMC Networks, not the movie theater, but rather the company that creates such series like The Walking Dead, Breaking Bad, Mad Men, etc. Pretty exciting to work in media and entertainment. It is the second time that I've held the post of Chief Diversity Officer. I was the CDO for ADP, very large payroll, tech, HR tech conglomerate. And I'm excited to be with you all. I am in an inaugural role, meaning this is the first time that our company decided to have such a role. I'm also the first Black woman to sit around the CEO's table. So exciting times, and I know there will be lots of questions about what that means with respect to structural alignment, and I'm happy to answer all. I am in New Jersey, talking to you all from my home office, and I am happily married, 18 years, with two beautiful little girls. I'm connected to Rutgers by way of being an alum. I got an MBA part-time, starting at the Newark campus and then going between Newark and New Brunswick. So excited to be here talking to you this evening.
Thank you so much. And next up, we have Danielle.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Pierre. I am a graduate from Seton Hall University, but a proud alumni of Rutgers Law School. I am currently an attorney from Genova, Burns, where I specialize in cannabis law and labor law. I am a part of my firm's DEI committee. I am a recent graduate of LEAD New Jersey, which is a professional fellowship program for diverse leaders, and a member of the Garden State Bar Association, which is an affinity group for Black attorneys in New Jersey. I'm really excited to be here today to discuss a very important topic with such an esteemed panel, so thank you.
Thank you. And Jonathan, you're up.
I think I'm the lone panelist who does not have an affiliation with Rutgers University, aside from this panel. I serve as the Director of Career Education at Oregon State University, originally from the San Francisco Bay Area, moved north about 8 years ago, 2 small children. I have a podcast called Soul Force Ones, where we explore purpose and practice and the inner workings of people and their work. and how they make cash, as in cash meaning not cash money. There's an acronym, but you can check out the podcast if you're interested in. Director or founder of Soul Force Education, which is a DEI consulting company. So very much about Soul Force for the workforce. Dr. King said we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with Soul Force. So for me, career education is very much connected to DEI and spiritual education. And so a lot of my work here at Oregon State is really focused on engaging students with historically marginalized identity, first generation college students who tend not to use a career development center. And so my role is largely to help integrate career education into the ethos of the university so that those students who arguably need it the most are able to access it. So really excited to be here today and to engage in this conversation. Thank you for having me.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. You just kind of spoke to my heart right there. But Sharon, you're up.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sharon Stroye. I am currently the Director of Public Engagement in the School of Public Affairs and Administration at Rutgers University, Newark. I am also the Director for the Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation Center, a double alum from Rutgers University, Newark, a master's degree in public administration, and a part-time, Aisha, part-time MBA student as well. Do understand that travel between Newark and New Brunswick. So at Rutgers, we love our acronyms. So you may hear me refer to the TRHT Center because it is shorter, as well as a grandmother in a brand new grandmother, proud mother of 3 adult children with an undergrad degree in accounting. And one of the things that I would like to say to really talk about my work in DEI is that I have 2 sons who went to predominantly white high schools, and the conversations that we've had to have with them, some of that residue is still with them, and those experiences that they have. So becoming a new grandmother in the middle of COVID, I've decided that we're not having those conversations. So the DEI work that I do takes on a very different approach. And it's not traditional. It is looking at the shared humanity, our shared humanity perspective, that let's begin with our humanity before we can start with any training. And it's my pleasure to join you tonight.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Sharon. And while you're a final speaker, I would like for you to elaborate a little bit more on that point, specifically around the work you're doing with the truth and what is it called again? Please forgive me for that.
Racial healing and transformation.
Right. So elaborate on that. And really, how did you come into that work? You mentioned your sons and the conversations that you had, but how did you decide or determine that you wanted to be the director of that center? How did you come to that?
Wow. Actually, I realized that I've been walking this path a long time as a first generation student in my family, and understanding that I was fortunate with some opportunities. I was a member of a federally funded program called Upper Bound. And then completing my undergraduate degree in accounting, so my last semester, and everybody's preparing for the CPA, I was like, nope, that's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to go work with these high school students that look like me to create opportunities and access for them. So 30 years in higher education, 20 years at Rutgers University, Newark, 10 years in the School of Public Affairs and Administration. It has always been about different roles and opportunities about creating access. How do we make sure we dismantle barriers and make sure that all students, regardless of race, ethnicity, immigration status, background, have the opportunity to benefit from an education? And so in 2017, the Office of the Chancellor submitted a grant application to the Association of American Colleges and Universities to host a TRHT campus center. And what it means is to create programming to dismantle institutional and structural racism through a shared humanity perspective, and to dismantle this belief in a hierarchy of human value. The individuals that we work with, we all come to this work with our own beliefs and biases. But in a process of using storytelling, arts, humanity, creating programming to where we share our stories of our shared living experiences. Before we get into a conversation of anti-racism, microaggression training, you need to see me as a human being. And once you see me as a human being, then we can have those difficult dialogues that lead to racial healing. We can have conversations about transformation. Then we can really look at policies and laws to see how we can change them. But if you don't see me as a human being, then this training means absolutely nothing. If you only see the melanin in my complexion and not that I'm a wife, a mother, a aunt, a grandmother, somebody that has lost a parent to cancer. When we get into those intimate conversations, we find out that we actually have more in common than we do different. So right now, the TRHT Center is working with departments on our campus with their DEI committees. So our president, Jonathan Holloway, has charged every academic unit to come up with a DEI strategy. But now we're bringing people together to form a committee that may have not necessarily worked together. So I work with those committees to build humanity amongst them before they develop their strategy. So we are the introduction to all of the DEI work that is still required and needed.
Thank you so much for that, Sharon. And I saw John just nodding. And I think a lot of what you just said spoke to his work around workforce and soul force. So Jonathan, with that in mind, can you elaborate a little bit on perhaps what you mean by soul force and what do you mean by really getting this language into the ethos of the college campus in which you're engaged, and also a little bit about your work around DEI and how you came to this space?
Yeah, I've come to call it DEI. I mean, I like disruption, equity, and inclusion, but for me, it's a matter of disruption, equity, and innovation and integration. And why I was nodding along with Sharon is the way that I've approached the language. Language matters. And so how we talk about career education matters, because oftentimes it's in very corporate, stale terms that don't really resonate with students. So just like Sharon was saying, it's storytelling. Like, that's nothing more than a resume. The resume is storytelling, sharing your story, helping our students understand the value of where they came from, who they are, and it's bringing an example. So I bring in Michelle Obama, and I'm like, Michelle Obama says it's the worst thing you can ask a kid is what they want to be when they grow up, because we are all becoming, right? It's networking, it's community building, it's relationships, it's how you connect with other people. What I wrote in the chat, that we're all connected, we're interconnected. We come from others, right? We come and we stand on the shoulders who have paved the way. So this illusion, this myth that I pull myself up on my bootstraps, it's like Muhammad Ali was the greatest boxer of all time. Best believe he had trainers and spiritual leaders in his corner. So having a network isn't just the doors that are open for you, but it's having someone who's got your back, a shoulder to cry on, right? So the emotional support, the psychological support, all of that matters just the same. And so it's Yoso's community cultural wealth model, knowing that there is value in who we are. And I wrote recently on LinkedIn, if diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance, then equity is changing the music. Not everyone wants to dance to that. So DJ, can we please tune down the Roaring 20s big band? Enough of the sock pop. Can we bump some hip hop? And, you know, let's share. Let's recognize that there's value, as Sharon was saying, in our lived experiences. And so much of my work in career education is helping our students from historically marginalized identities recognize the value in their story. It's that imposter syndrome. The fact that a public health student who wants to be an advocate for farm workers was led to believe that her experience working in the field, where she had already done that work, right? So she's a public health student. She didn't include that on her resume because she had this narrative that that wasn't relevant, that it didn't matter. And so helping our students recognize that it's really a matter of connecting the dots and helping them value where they've been and who they are.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Jonathan. And speaking of being invited to the party, breaking barriers, connections, and networks, I want to pivot over to you, Aisha, because you mentioned this is your second CDO role, the first time for the AMC organization, and you're the perhaps the only Black woman or person at the CEO's cabinet within your organization. Yeah. So give us some insight. How did you come to these CDO roles, and specifically this particular organization? And what's it like becoming and being in this current role?
So loaded set of questions, but before I answer, I have to give a nod to John because I frequently quote Verna Meyer, who I believe initially coined the whole analogy of being invited to the party and then being asked to dance. My iteration on that is actually from an equity perspective, not just being able to select the music, but being part of the planning committee that planned the event. And so I love that. I love all of the iterations on it. And I just wanted to, look you in your eye and tell you why I was smiling. So what is it like to be in a chief diversity officer role, the first one? I'll tell you, it was interesting to join a company during the pandemic. So that's point number one. I never in a million years would have thought I would, leave an industry and a company that I so dearly loved to join an organization that I only knew from a consumer standpoint. But that sort of ignorance, if you will, is what got me excited. Certainly, I've been connected to DEI work for a very long time, like you. I was actually in a diversity manager role, believe it or not, back at JP Morgan Chase, probably in the year 2002, 2003, if I had to take a guess. And that was before DEI was ever even coined a thing. But I really stumbled into this chief spot the first time and now the second time, really by accident. I mean, I count myself as a business leader first, having grown up in the human resources function. The sort of capstone of my HR career was as the head of HR for one of ADP's major business segments. It was my dream job. And at that time, working very closely with the CDO on people strategy that took a DEI lens. She announced her early retirement, and we were all shocked, dazed, and confused. And our boss at the time, the CHRO, turned to me and said, do you want to grab the torch or grab the baton? And quite honestly, and I believe in being transparent and always telling the truth, my initial answer was no. Like, why, no. I was quite content with having the subject matter as an integral part, a central part of everything I did, from a people strategy and, understanding the business imperative, around the work. But I by no means wanted to be responsible for it as a full-time endeavor. But some interesting things happen when you think your answer is no. And I have to be honest in that it felt like a call. It felt like a divine sort of call for me to do something that was necessary at the time. I could not have imagined that I would take the post in advance of the 2020 summer with the awful murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, et cetera, and the list goes on and on. Organizationally, I don't know that any company was prepared for what would happen next. But I knew that coming into the chief diversity officer role, that I would need to trust and rely on, the pretty good training or training ground that I experienced as an HR executive. So at least coming with the people strategy side, I would then be able to meet, and now in this role, sort of meet the consumer side with content and programming that is representative, that includes the voices and the images and the characters of people from all walks of life. And so in my current job, I am getting myself involved with not just people strategy, but content strategy and also strategy around our brand.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And I wanted to just also get your feedback, Danielle. How did you come into this work, particularly being an attorney? Aisha just mentioned everything that happened in the wake of the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. So as a practicing attorney, what have you observed? What have you noticed? And how does that impact the work, particularly around labor and race?
Yeah, certainly. I know for me personally, since the murder of George Floyd, I took a personal interest to raise diversity within my own office. So after the summer of 2020, I asked some of the leading partners over at my firm to look at our diversity ratios, see if we can do any diverse hirings. In addition to that, also to mentor and network with the next generation so that they can too break barriers. And since then, we were able to launch a professional development summit for Rutgers Law School students, where we provided a sizable donation to assist them to travel to job interviews, for business cards, and also to have professional headshots, so then that way they can be prepared when they interview for jobs and to put it on their LinkedIn profiles. We also facilitated an interview workshop with each individual who was interested to come in to discuss the needs of their interviewing needs, and to have a mock interview with professionals in the field. So then that way, when they go out in the real world and have those interviews, they're prepared with how to dress and what responses to give during interviews. In terms of my practice of law in the labor field, I can tell you that oftentimes there's investigative interviews or investigations that were retained to investigate. And a lot of times that the accusations are certain employees are acting aggressively, or certain employees come to work angry. And we all know that these are buzzwords targeted at certain people of a certain demographic. And I use that as an opportunity to provide that informal diversity training to those managers and supervisors to understand the cultural differences that can take place between individuals of different cultures.
Thanks so much for that, because I have two questions that are percolating right now. One of them is for Jonathan, because he actually speaks to that in some of the work that he does around professionalism, or around language and how it's coded, and how we tend to frame certain interactions or even certain hairstyles with certain groups, particularly around the work around career education. But I just I want to put a pin in that, because I definitely want to touch on that a little bit more. But I wanted to ask you, Danielle, specifically. Now, you mentioned with everything that happened around George Floyd, your organization felt compelled to do something around diversity training, let's say for future lawyers. You brought that to them, and this is for the entire panel. Do you believe, Danielle, that without George Floyd, you would have been able to have that particular impact within your organization in terms of them, let's say, supporting you with the initiatives around supporting diverse law school at Rutgers? And I also want to ask the rest of the panelists as well, really, what impact did the murder of George Floyd have on the work that you do? But first, back to Danielle, do you think you would have been able to facilitate, let's say, the workshops within your organization if that did not occur?
An honest answer to that, I think the answer is yes. I think the firm would have been open to it, because even prior to the murder of George Floyd, during Black History Month, the firm did contact certain attorneys to see what they can do to increase diversity initiatives. However, I believe that the murder of George Floyd helped us to propel the initiatives and to really put our heads together to put a plan into action.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say too, when it acted as an accelerator. And it also sort of made for an environment where it's very difficult for people to say no, meaning no to an investment that's necessary, no to goals and measures of accountability that we know will serve to move the needle. So there are a lot more, I feel like, open ears and open eyes, and a lot more receptivity to the strategy that perhaps, many of us were working on summer of last year, but that sort of catalyst moment served to move us faster, move us, more aggressively to make change in the space of improving representation, in the space of increased training that we know will make for a more inclusive work environment, in the space of, investing in, at least in my line of work, investing in diverse content that people are consuming. So.
Okay, thank you. Sharon, Jonathan, do you have anything you want to add to that conversation? Sharon?
Yeah, I definitely do. So the TRHT campus centers, there right now, when we began, we were one of 10 inaugural institutions that had a campus center. And the reason they selected colleges and universities is some of the most hierarchical ivory tower places are colleges and universities, and looking at our own individual in-house, the work that we needed to do. So for us at Rutgers University, Newark, we have leadership that believes in collaborating with community partners. So we worked with the Newark Public Library, we worked with the New Jersey Institute of Social Justice, and to work within Rutgers University, Newark, and in the city of Newark. That was the work that we were focusing on, programming to help, to definitely speak to what Jonathan was saying about changing the narrative. Historically, there's a history when you say Newark, New Jersey, and you get these negative responses. And so our programming was focused on the perception, or people that work at Rutgers University, Newark, but don't purchase from the local stores in the community. So that was what our work focused on. George Floyd shifted drastically. We officially launched the center in 2018 after George Floyd. It wasn't just Rutgers University, Newark. It was nonprofit organizations. It was community colleges, municipalities with high income, predominantly white residents. We want to talk about this. How can we get engaged in this work? And there was definitely a shift. For example, we had a nonprofit arts organization in New Brunswick where everybody in the organization except one person was white. They had one person of color. They decided on their own to shut down for a season to become an anti-racist organization. But they realized they needed to look at their board of directors. They needed to look how they do programming, and brought us in to do a series of anti-implicit bias assessment workshop, and to bring people of color into that are artists to share their experiences about being an artist as a person of color that they've never engaged in this conversation before. And so now they are they're one of our community partners and very intentional in this space. But to be honest, I don't know if that would have been the conversation without the unfortunate murder of George Floyd, which is an unfortunate opportunity.
Thank you for that, Sharon. And I wanted to really, I meant it when I said put a pin in that, because Jonathan, you do a lot of talk, and I think this is perhaps a lot of work, I should say, around, I think the term that you may have used is like decolonizing the workplace. And I wanted you to just speak to that a little bit, because on one hand, we have Danielle saying, part of what we did in the organization is we taught students how to pretty much look the part, LinkedIn profiles, resumes, interviews, right? And and then we're having conversation about being a part of the planning committee or even changing the music. So when you think about a workplace that's truly, let's call it inclusive, one with social justice, what does that look like to you? And when you say decolonize the workplace, what do you think of, or what is your intention when you use that kind of language?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Just to piggyback on what was shared about George Floyd real quick, I've been in higher education for about 15, 20 years, but have only been in career education for 2 years. So I started here in our Department of Career Education right before George Floyd was murdered. So this was in December 2019. And what was really surprising was that in higher ed, we talk all about identity development. We talk about race, gender, sexuality, but there was a wall when it came to career development. From my perspective, and this isn't just true of Oregon State, from what I've learned about career development throughout the country, very much kind of parroted what colleagues are hearing from corporate environments. Essentially that you have to act white, talk white, that you're perpetuating dominant normatives that are rooted in patriarchy, whiteness, and heteronormativity. And so I've since tried to break that. And I was doing that before George Floyd was murdered. My sense is that, like the rest of the country, people became more receptive to listening, that many people were saying the same things. We knew this as Black and brown people, but people weren't listening. And so I think that's what largely changed when George Floyd was murdered. And as it relates to, decolonizing professionalism, I think once George Floyd was murdered, people are more receptive to even using provocative language like that challenges the dominant cultural norm, because they've become a little bit more aware of it. So it's a little less shocking. Again, they're more inclined to listen. So for my students, it's largely about being and encouraging them to be authentic. And it's a challenge because I want our students to be who they authentically are. If you're a Black man who's going into business and you're rocking a fro or cornrows, I want you to be confident in being able to do that. But we also simultaneously have to have this conversation about the implications of that. And this isn't anything new for our students. They've navigated being women, Black, whatever that identity is throughout their whole lives. It's just a different context now when we talk about the workplace. So maybe to answer your question about decolonizing professionalism, I also have a spoken word piece that I wrote that's titled just that. And so I'll maybe share a little bit of that. It starts off with, Paul Mooney said, if your hair is relaxed, white people are relaxed. If your hair is nappy, they're not happy. You can't master the interview till you've mastered the interview, till you've realized who you are and your added value. But if the system's broken, then who's rewriting the rules so that you can succeed by simply being a better version of you, not by matching belts and shoes, that's for show, not by having to change your dashiki thobes, frozen cornrows. Workplace culture that perpetuates dominant social norms has got to go. The status quo is broken, makes no damn sense, only dollars and cents for those whose needs already been met. The rich, Mike Pence, the 1%, we dropping bad habits as if it were Lent. We about character, work ethic, and integrity, not how our hair is done or what we're wearing, but our oneness and our shared humanity, where we're from and the power of our story. No changing who we are to fit in, that's performatory. Do you hear the inner music it plays inside you and I? This is active resistance, Black Lives Matter, free Palestine. Netflix changed the game, Blockbuster died, that's capitalism. Change the game, a new way for increased efficiency and equity, that is activism. George Floyd had to cry for his mother, helplessly pleading, I can't breathe, before the NFL would acknowledge Black Lives Matter. Didn't do that when Kaepernick got players taking knees. Kids told what matters is on the inside, grow up, get a job, then they realize that civilizing and professionalizing always been based on the most evil of white lies. It's not an accident, there's both reason and rhyme. It's a construction intentionally designed, treaty rights ignored by constructing keystone pipelines to extract resources and maintain the bottom line, segregated housing, they redrawn red lines, refusing Black people credit lines, maintaining power with redrawn district lines. And you surprised there's more Black and brown people in the unemployment lines, living below poverty lines, making money as they maintain the asinine supremacy of the European bloodline. All this stress, no wonder my people got these receding hairlines. Let me let you in on the secret, listen to the end and I'll answer KRS-One's wise. Killing the Indian to save the man, an American genocide, contrived by white supremacy time after time to consume, celebrating pilgrims, consuming poultry and pumpkin pies, to remember boarding schools for native kids kidnapped and baptized, told how to dress, talk, and use the butter knife, how to do their hair and which fork to use at dinner time, that he's, quote, civilized, was used to tame the savage and justify this crime. What's professional is cultural, keeping people in power comfortable. We those bulls in China shops, breaking barriers and glass ceilings, we are so damn powerful. The powers that be afraid of us remembering we descend from leaders like Abdul Hamid and Sitting Bull.
That was deep, John. I'm not gonna lie to you, right? It's loaded. You have so much information in that, but then how do we take that? Let's say, because Sharon, I've even asked you this question before. I know what the work that you're doing in the TRHT, right? And I said to you, why is it that when we're in these spaces when we're having these conversations, let's say about diversity, it's normally the marginalized populations that are present, are the majority. How do we get allyship? What can we do to maybe get some people who do perhaps have the power ability to change the narrative? Because I think I'm looking in the chat and everyone is like, oh my gosh, amazing, applause, applause. And it resonates with us in so many different ways. But by the same token, we can challenge, let's say, the dominant power structure, but we don't necessarily have that power. And the individuals that can make the change, they're not in those racial healing circles, right? They're not necessarily going to listen to your spoken word. And maybe this is even more pointed for you, Aisha, particularly as a person whose responsibility is Chief Diversity Officer. How do we get, let's say, those folks who would be a part of the dominant group, wherever that may be, because, right, it's not always about race, right? Whoever it might be, maybe it's just I'll just leave it at that. Whoever the dominant group might be within a particular context, how do we introduce them to the conversation? Because at a certain point, isn't it them essentially giving up a bit of their power? But that could go to anybody, but I was gonna just talk, yeah.
So let me just say, one of the things that I do, one of the tools that we use is called a racial healing circle. But the first thing I do in those spaces where it is not the people of color is I find a credible messenger. I find that somebody that gets it, but maybe silent, maybe a little apprehensive, maybe a little afraid. And then I engage them in my space, and what I do and invite them. Once I engage them, and once again, it's about our shared humanity. Once I engage them in a racial healing circle, then I ask them to create the same thing in their space. Let me just give you an example. A racial healing circle is not a conversation about race. It is an opportunity in a safe, brave, and responsible space to tell our stories. So like we did on this panel, we introduced ourselves, and the first thing we said is who we are and what we do. Well, my introductory question is your full name, your birth order, and where were your great-grandparents born? Because race is a construct. Black and white are colors in a crown box. I need to know where were your grandparents from, because 9 times out of 10, they may not be from this indigenous native land. They may be from someplace else. But now we're talking about great-grandparents and the stories that come with that, and the memories, and your childhood, because it's in your childhood where that first narrative began. So I need you to connect to that. Once I do that, then we engage in when you walk into a room, what identity is most prominent? The intersection of our identities, and people start sharing these things in these spaces and realize, wait, we got more in common than we do different. And then the last question usually is something that touches into a level of oppression. Share a story about a time when you had a difficult situation and couldn't respond the way you wanted to. 9 times out of 10, we all have one. But I had one Caucasian woman who came back into the large Zoom room mad. She was still angry. She was on fire. Her response was so visceral. The only thing I needed to say was, now you know what racism feels like. Oppression, racism, prejudice, discrimination, it's all the same construct. It's all from the same place. Can we have a conversation about those experiences to where you realize that my brown skin, I live with every day. So that anger that you're feeling right now, imagine feeling it every single day. Once I do that, now I need to go into your community, that dominant normative community, and I need you to be the facilitator, the narrator, the storyteller. And I look for because there's always the people that talk to the choir. That's what it is. We always find the people that get it. But I'm looking to work with the movable middle. Those that get it, but not saying anything. When it becomes more of the movable middle on this side, those that are resistant, those numbers become smaller and smaller, and they're no longer part of the in group. They're actually the out group. And they have to make a decision where they want to be.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Aisha, I want to touch base with you because I'm just curious to your perspective, right? How does this look in the context of let's say, a corporate space, the work environment? What does that look like, particularly as we're having conversations about decolonizing professionalism?
Which I love. Sharon, I love the movable middle. I often say, look, my job is not to move people from negative to positive. I will waste a whole lot of breath and a whole lot of energy trying to do that. Everything that I do is structured to move people from negative to neutral and neutral to positive. And doing that in the corporate construct has everything to do with opening people's eyes, opening their hearts in some cases, and opening up their minds. So here's something that I found works a lot with work folks. I tell people, whether it's off the back of DEI training, whether it's, as part of programming that our employee resource groups, or as some organizations call business resource groups, host, there are two suggestions or recommendations I make for people to do something themselves. One is, and you can all do it, I don't know how many people are convened on this call, but if you go to your LinkedIn profile, right? 7 times out of 10, if you're operating in a professional environment or a corporate environment, you have a LinkedIn profile. If you cannot go to your connections and find any other profile than the profile that you identify with, it's on you to fix that. And it goes both ways. It goes for white people who need to diversify their networks, and it goes for everybody else, whatever identity or dimension of diversity you align to. If you cannot point to anyone that has a different profile than you, then start there. And starting there could mean, meeting more people at work that are different from you, getting yourself involved with, volunteer organizations. This Rutgers Club is a great example of that. But I also encourage people in this exercise to think very introspectively on how they get their job done, what they need and who they need in order to be successful in the workplace. And if you can make a list of 10 people that you go to, your go-to people, to make decisions, to get your work done, et cetera, if there is nobody on your list that has a different profile than you, then you ought to be fixing that. Start with yourself first. In the context of employee resource groups, and I hear you loud and clear, whoever made the comment about preaching to the choir, we're all like-minded on this call around the need for greater equity, greater diversity, et cetera. But when we're putting on this programming in all of our respective companies, we have a tendency, whoever we is, to tell people about the programming or the initiatives that are like us. Think about who you bring to the party, right? Since we talked about the party earlier, who are you bringing to the party? Well, probably 7 times out of 10, the person you're bringing to the party is like you, in some way, shape, or form. So I always encourage people to think about their +1 and bring a different +1 to the party. And in order to bring a different +1 to the party, you actually have to formulate and cultivate deeper relationships with people who are not like you. And the majority, or the people that are in the dominant group, need to act on that first. And they usually hear me loud and clear when forced to make that short list of people to go to, or to look at their LinkedIn profile and realize or be met with the revelation that I got some work to do myself personally before I even can start to engage in initiatives and programming and stuff that is sort of cooked up from a corporate perspective. Start with you.
Thank you so much for that. This has really been a good conversation. I feel like we could go a little bit deeper, because with each of you, I want to probe a little bit more. I want to ask you more and more, but we have about 10 minutes remaining, and I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. And I just kind of want to toss it to the audience at this time. Is there any question that we have from our audience members that you would like for me to pose, or I can ask directly to our team of panelists? Now is really a good time to pose your question to the group, and we could see if we could tackle that, answering it. But this is just really for everyone, given your respective field as the audience thinks up questions. But I want to pose this to the entire group, right? So we've talked about diversity, equity, inclusions, and various iterations of what that may look like. Now we're including this notion of social justice. So I wanted to ask you, where do you see this space going based on the work that you have done, and based on everything that's transpired, let's say within the last year, even 2 years, and really all the factors that have really accelerated or deepened or enhanced our interest in this space collectively, I would say, as a country. Where do you see this going, or what do you see happening in the context of conversations around DEI and social justice? Anyone can raise their hand and take the question, or if you like, I can call on someone. Should I pick a speaker? Aisha, I see you laughing, so now I'm gonna pick you. Where do you see it going? And it's formally a part of your title, right? And then I want to like just, and this maybe I'm gonna drop a little bit of just kind of like a little, this is my own pet peeve, because I often find that what happens, at least prior to, let's say, the last 24 months, you find that a lot of organizations would have these positions, but there wasn't really a lot of, let's say, teeth behind it, sure. Right? So where do you see the space going now, particularly from, let's say, the corporate lens, or, just based on the work that you've been doing?
So I hope that this is where it's going, what I'm getting ready to share. I would love for, and I hope I'm around for the day where the chief diversity officer role is not necessary. But in order for that to happen, there is going to need to be a level of accountability for changing the face of organizations, changing the fairness or the justice, to use your term, around, everyone being able to show up and have, based on their talent, no barriers to be their best self at work or achieve whatever their goals and objectives are within said corporation. The challenge will be whether or not we can maintain the momentum from last summer through to whenever that time is that these roles are no longer necessary. And I think the key to it is going to be greater representation in the decision-making seats. So until there is more than just an Aisha sitting around a CEO table, we will continue to struggle to keep the challenges forefront in the minds of the dominant culture. We will continue to struggle with ensuring that talent has equal opportunity, if you will, or equity as they move up the corporate ladder. But I really, in my heart of hearts, believe that the change is going to come as a result of different kinds of people being in those decision-making seats.
Thank you, Aisha. And I have a question from the chat. We're just curious, at least from Tanya, about the justice piece in the DEIJ, diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, perhaps in the context of criminal justice, the context of the criminal justice system reform. So where does that fit in? When you, Daniel, if you have an opinion on it specifically, when you hear about diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice within the context of criminal justice reform, particularly as an attorney?
Yeah, sure. So I can preface this by just explaining I'm not a criminal law attorney, but the way that I see the direction going is what we've been asking for throughout this entire Black Lives movement, right? Black Lives Matter movement, where when you're dealing with certain situations, it doesn't always require a police officer to be there. Or even when a law enforcement officer does show up at your door, it's important to also have that law enforcement officer to be accompanied with someone with a social worker degree or someone that can provide those social services that that victim or that family will need during that time in crisis, where it doesn't always have to result in that, more likely than not, that Black and brown person being arrested, tried, and convicted. So those are my personal goals for the DEIJ in terms of the criminal justice reform.
And how does it relate to your work with equitable cannabis laws, if it relates at all?
Oh yeah, it absolutely does. So a lot of us attorneys and operators, we've been lobbying and we've been promoting the fact that we should prioritize social equity applicants. And what I mean by social equity applicants are the applicants who lived in areas where we know the failed war on drugs really had a focus on in the urban areas, what they call the impact zones. We should also look at the applicants who have been arrested and who have been convicted of marijuana offenses and who have been rehabilitated for those same charges that now we're allowing this grand industry for other people to monopolize on. So there's certainly room in the cannabis space for us to look at it with a social equity lens and to provide an opportunity for others to get a leg up in this industry.
Beautiful. Thank you, guys. And if I'm following our timetable, we are definitely at time. But I want to thank each and every one of the panelists for presenting this evening. Like I said, I could literally sit with each of you and perhaps ask you my own set of questions, because I'm just very curious about the work that you're doing and definitely would love an opportunity to learn more. So I want to extend my thank yous and my appreciation for you being present with us this evening and for you to sharing your perspective as well as your insights. So I'm going to turn it over now to Isaac. Are you there, Isaac? I believe he's going to close us out for the evening. Isaac, are you there?
Hey, Wenylla, thank you so much. Thank you guys. I really appreciate everybody coming out tonight on behalf of Rutgers Club, New York City. Great hearing a lot of the insight, background, and everything you guys spoke about. I hope this is just the beginning and not the end. And, you know, we all learned something from this today. Myself, I'm part of the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee at Barclays Investment Bank in Manhattan. So definitely going to take some of the points I learned here and relay that over. So thank you so much, everybody. Appreciate it. And I'll pass it to Tanya for closing remarks.
Yes, I don't have much more to add to say than just to thank our panelists and again, our co-volunteers for helping to organize this event. Thank you everyone who joined us, and we'll be following up with an email and perhaps sharing some more information to continue our education on DEIJ in the workplace. Thank you so much and have a great evening.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Bye, everyone. Good night. Thank you.